under eating, and I want to make this clear, and I do think that there are a couple clients that I have in mind where it's intentional, so maybe they've been dieting for a while. But a lot of times when I'm talking about under eating, it's an unintentional thing. So maybe you're on a really restrictive diet, which can lead to under eating and not getting enough overall calories. Maybe it's your symptoms that are just creating a lot of problems getting enough nutrition in.
Or maybe you're stressed out up to here and you don't have the time to eat and you're scarfing a granola bar on the go. I see a lot of those too.
Yeah, I see a lot of that too. And I think it's hard the more restrictive the diet gets because the harder it is to find things to eat. So sometimes it's easier not to eat than to worry about eating, or maybe you're worried about symptoms throughout the day, so you skip meals. So there's a lot of potential for undereating in the SIBO IBS realm, just because there's a whole nother layer of like symptoms at play that can drive undereating. And I think just generally as a culture, we don't flag undereating really well because we're very calorie centric.
We kind of encourage it a lot of the time.
Yeah, exactly. All the ads are like this, low calorie that. And that's just been programmed in us from probably the day we were born, even if we're not aware of it. So, and I find too that a lot of the conventional and even functional practitioners, because they grew up in this environment too, that a lot of times they're not flagging weight loss or like indicators that undereating could be occurring. And it doesn't, you don't have to lose weight, which I'll describe maybe a little bit later, to be undereating. But I find that it gets missed often in the functional integrative space and even the conventional space, because we're a very like thin centric society. We're very quick to like, I think the conventional and functional medicine space would be way more quick to tell someone to lose weight than they would be to tell them to gain weight. And in dietetics, there's a lot of indicators to look out for, especially for unintentional weight gain or unintentional weight loss. I'm sorry. And you really have to be aware of like, okay, if you're starting to lose like significant amount of weight unintentionally, and significant could be different based on your original size. So like, you know, if someone's typically like 105 or 110 pounds, like 5 pounds is a decent amount of weight loss for them to lose.
Exactly.
And that's something that's key, because sometimes people are like, well, I've only lost like 5 or 6 pounds, but I'm like, percentage body weight, like that's a decent amount.
Well, versus me, I'm 6 feet tall and I'm about 175, 180 pounds. So to me, 5 pounds is like, like that's like 2 of my toes. I don't know. Like that's really hardly anything.
Yeah, exactly. So it definitely could depend on what your original size is and like what your optimal or like usual body weight is. So I use Chronometer as well to check in on calories. I'm not a big fan of calorie tracking all the time. I think it's a waste of time, and it like is not a good way to spend your energy to track every single day.
I was going to say an energy suck. So you kind of took the words from me.
It's an energy suck. I think 2 or 3 days is plenty to just see like what your typical patterns are. And I think it's having an understanding of where your calories should be falling as well, which is like, again, if you're working with someone, they should be able to guide you. But there are some like decent calorie calculators that you can plug in. Make sure that they're adding in some like activity levels too. Like sometimes people are looking up and it's like the basal metabolic rate. So that's not like your calorie needs. That's like if you did nothing but lay in your bed all day.
Oh, that sounds glorious.
Yeah, that's what the calorie needs would be. So it's really important to try to get a gauge on where you're falling. If you have absolutely no idea, doing like a Chronometer exercise makes a lot of sense from my end.
Just a check-in.
Yeah, a check-in. That's how I use it. And sometimes like I'll do it again. Like if someone is like, oh, like I think I'm getting enough, but I'm not totally sure. And I was like, well, why don't you do the Chronometer like for a day or two, and just to get a gauge like in a month or two, and we can kind of see where you're at or whatever it looks like. Sometimes we'll check back in. But to do all the time is too much from my standpoint. So, but with the undereating space, usually I like to figure out if it's a problem from a restriction standpoint, which usually is like there at least a little bit, or a problem from a symptom standpoint. So those are the two things that I like to figure out. And I think even if there's like weight loss attached to it, I also want to look at like absorption. It's rare, I would say, to like for me to look at a case where they're getting enough calories and just like totally not absorbing it, and that's the root of the weight loss. I would say more often than not, it's either undereating or symptoms driving undereating, or restrictions driving undereating that's causing the problem. Because I know that's like a very popular thing, like I'm just not absorbing things, but then I'm like, oh, like let's look in at your diet, because it looks like it's a little bit low in carbs and a little low in some of these things that could raise calories up. So it might be more than just that you're not absorbing, that you're losing weight. Do you ever kind of see that as well? Like
I've noticed, I think a lot of people self-assess that they have malabsorption, and I'm always careful to ask them, have you been diagnosed with malabsorption, or is this hypothesized? Same thing with leaky gut. So many people come in and they tell me in the first appointment or the free phone call that we do, they'll tell me I have leaky gut, and I ask them like, oh, okay, like how is that assessed? And they're like, oh, well, I just read about it. And I'm like, you might. I'm not denying leaky gut by any means.
Right.
But let's test for it and think, or like let's think about it, like what is the likelihood for you as an individual, rather than just saying like everybody with IBS has leaky gut or everybody with Crohn's has leaky gut. Like let's try to figure you out as an individual, and then we know, okay, do we really need to worry about this, and how aggressively do we treat it? And similarly with malabsorption, like let's see if that's a thing. Let's see if we could do some combination of like blood testing and stool testing and figure out, okay, are you truly malabsorbing? Do you have numerous nutrient deficiencies, low bun, low protein, low albumin, like signs of protein deficiency, hair and skin and nails? Like we can look at it from a physical exam, from a testing standpoint, and then deduce, yes, you do have some malabsorption, or no, you don't. But I think like the true cases of malabsorption, there's usually some restriction there too, because if you think about it, the people who have malabsorption tend to have very severe SIBO or Crohn's or colitis or celiac disease or something going on that is making them restrict their diet. So it's usually a twofer. Even if you have true actual malabsorption, you probably have both, where you're also not consuming enough calories because there's something driving that pathology that's triggering you to not eat enough calories. So it's kind of a double whammy a lot of the time, even with true malabsorption syndrome situations.
Right. And I know like we're also, I think once like undereating's established, so like, like, oh, like I'm not quite getting enough calories, or you're working with someone that's says like, hey, you need to add some calories in. Once that's established, I also think like it's just good to know what that means in terms of digestion and motility, and how that's affecting gut function.
Yeah, like what's the relevance, man? Why is it a problem?
Yeah, and I think because like dieting and dieting culture is so prominent that like it just seems very normal to be under calories. And from a digestive standpoint, we just came off the stress episode. So undereating is a huge stressor on the body. And so it's going to shut down motility. It's going to shut down digestion, because your body feels like it's under stress. And when your body feels like it's under stress, it's going to shut down what it considers like non-essential systems in that
reproduction,
moment.
Thyroid hormones, sex hormones.
Exactly.
Pooping.
Exactly. It runs the gamut of just suppressing a lot of different things. And I just view it as halting digestion. And as we've said many times, like root causal factors of SIBO and IBS affect digestive capacity and motility in huge ways. And under eating does both of those things. It's going to impact motility. It's going to impact digestive capacity. And if you're just going along chronically under eating, it could be holding you back in so many ways. And I think, and I'm like in the nutritional space, so I probably have a huge bias, but I think that that's a huge missed piece of the SIBO puzzle, and why a lot of people might be chronic, even though they could be addressing some great things and great root causal things outside of the diet piece, where they're sort of missing the mark. There's a lot of people that I've worked with where I'm like, man, you're covering a lot of amazing bases.
Yeah.
And you should be progressing. But then I look at their diet and they're well under their needs. And if we can get their calorie needs up, usually they start improving. And it's because
your body feels nourished and safe.
Exactly.
On some level.
Exactly. And I mean, I think that's the frustrating part. And with these restrictive diets is that nutrition just totally takes a back seat, and you can't really move forward with any chronic condition if you're not nourished, because of how it affects your body's stress response and shuts down these non-essential systems. It seems really simple, but it can be a little complicated to get calories back up. But it can be super impactful from a digestive motility standpoint. I think that transitional state of going from a lower calorie to a higher calorie point can be a little bit rocky. So there can be sometimes an increase of symptoms as you're adding more calories in. That can be like a little tricky. And there's definitely some strategies that you can use to help with that process. But from what I've seen, with some people, there's no issue at all. So like they just go on a higher calorie diet and they feel better, just like right from the get-go. And then there's a subset where it is like more of a challenge, where it's like, oh yeah, like getting calories up, I just feel like so full. And they could have been under eating for so long that their gut's just like not used to that level of calories. So their body your body has to adapt to different dietary things. And usually I'll probably broaden the diet up. So like as they're increasing calories, they might be also adding some new foods in. And even that process, I mean, we can talk about this too in like another episode about like how to properly reintro foods.
It's a biggie. And it's going to be different for different diets potentially too.
Yeah. And I think reintros are tricky because there can be some slight increases of symptoms. Like I don't want someone to think that it's okay that they're having severe symptoms. Yeah. But you almost have to prepare yourself. And this isn't with everybody, but with certain people, they might have, some annoying symptoms for a period of time as they're adding some foods in. Not anything painful or disruptive. That would be something I'd want to avoid. But like the process of reintroing something that you haven't had in 2 years, or in those scenarios, you would think that your body needs some time to adjust to them, and your microbiome needs to like reestablish itself to feed gut bugs that break down that food. So,
I kind of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just gonna say that, like, it just allowing yourself to be okay with some slight symptoms as your body's adjusting is key.
Yeah. And I think, I kind of almost picture you have this vast jungle or like a big frat party of bacteria living in your intestines. Yeah. And if the frat party only was feeding the guests, I'm just going to run with this analogy. Yeah. If the frat party was only serving beer and pizza, then all the people who like beer and pizza are coming out and hanging out, and the people who want to eat like vegetables are maybe hanging out in the kitchen. And then if a big old veggie platter comes in, like those guys have to come back out. They're like, "What? You brought me what? Yeah. No way." And it's like there's going to be an influx of some more people in that room, or like more people at the party. I don't know. Like my mind works a lot in metaphors, but I imagine like more bugs coming to the party and like, don't mind if I do a whole grain. Ooh, looking good there. And it'll, it's like you're stirring up a little bit of this like bubbles and these little, you're feeding people who haven't been fed in a long time. And
Yeah.
by people, I mean your bacteria. And also, I think you touched on something, and I don't know if it was intentional, but this concept of like digestive fire or digestive like capacity or gusto is really important, where if you've been chronically under eating or chronically on a restricted diet for a long time, then that was redundant, chronically for a long time. Anyway, if you've been eating a restricted diet or a lower calorie diet for a long time, then all of a sudden you're demanding more of your body. Like, wait, I need to make twice as much stomach acid and 3 times as much bile and 2 times as much whatever. Whoa.
Yeah.
And it's going to take your cells a little bit of time to kind of catch up with the memo that you're demanding more of them. So I can think of it from like a Western medicine physiology standpoint, but in Chinese medicine and TCM, they'll talk about that as like, digestive fire or digestive capacity. And you literally need to like put some wood on the fire and stoke the flame to build it
Yeah.
up again. Because if your fire is weak and like a piddly little wussy ass fire, you need
Yeah.
to put some fuel on the fire and like build that up. And you could do that with, I mean, tons of strategies, but even just like chewing your food more thoroughly,
Yeah.
mindful eating practices, digestive enzymes or betaine HCl, like whatever it takes for the individual. But I think just giving your body that space and that permission to build up a little bit at a time, because you are demanding more of it, and that's okay. And it might take a little bit of time for your body to adjust to the new demands and your microbiome to adjust to the new demands. Like, I think allowing for that space is really important.